Good morning. I'm Dusky Terry, president of ITC Midwest. We are pleased to be the presenting sponsor of the Iowa Ideas Conference for the fourth year in a row and proud of our partnership with the Gazette. As Iowa's independent electric transmission company serving 2/3 of the state, ITC Midwest is invested in and has a very real stake in the future of Iowa. We've supported this conference since its inception because we embrace its mission of gathering Iowans together to explore the key questions and the big ideas that shape the future. ITC Midwest was formed 15 years ago with a promise to improve electric reliability and increase grid capacity across the Midwest. We've since delivered on that promise by reducing transmission-related power outages by 65% and reliably powering Iowa's economy. Our investment in the transmission system has also enabled the development of low-cost renewable energy resources like wind and solar across the rural landscape. The result is a modernized electric grid working to keep utility bills as low as possible. From extreme weather events, such as recent derechos, to the unprecedented transition to renewable energy generation, and from the rapid adoption of electric vehicles to the increasing focus on energy system resilience, the electric utility industry remains in the national spotlight. The electrification of the economy is placing new demands on the electric grid. All of these forces reinforce the critical role of the transmission grid to support the changing landscape and ensure consumers have access to low-cost, clean, and reliable electricity. Simply put, we have a shared mission with the Iowa Ideas Conference, and that is to improve the lives of Iowans. Now, we often talk here at ITC about the power of connection, meaning connections are needed to deliver power to communities. There's also tremendous power when people connect to solve problems. Over the next couple of days, I hope you will engage in the breakout sessions, speak up during discussions, and share your ideas to create a brighter future. Open your mind to different points of view as we all work together to come up with the best solutions for making Iowa an even better place now and in the future. Thank you for your participation to help shape the future, and I hope you have a great conference.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Iowa Ideas 2022. I'm Zach Kacharski. I'm the executive editor of the Gazette, and on behalf of the entire Gazette team and those that are helping us pull this massive event together, welcome. We're proud to welcome a record number of attendees to our 6th year. This is our 3rd virtual year. We're bringing you, over the course of the next day and a half, more than 50 sessions, and it features more than 235 panelists across 9 subject tracks. The tracks and sessions are the results of months of work, a collaboration between the track leads on the Gazette team, as well as our advisory councils. In 2022, we grew our advisory councils to more than 90 industry experts from across the state. Thank you to every council member who selflessly gave their time to help us pull together the ideas, as well as find panelists to have take part in these sessions. Well, this is a virtual conference, as Dusky mentioned. This experience is designed to give attendees a number of opportunities to connect, and we want you to do that. Remember to submit questions and use the community discussion boards, the attendee directory, and register for speed networking tomorrow. I promise it won't be an awkward experience. On behalf of the entire team, access to all who want to participate in Iowa Ideas remains a top priority. Making it a free conference is made possible thanks to our conference sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, our track sponsors, Kirkwood Community College, the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, Inclusive ICR, Alliant Energy, and our incredible media, community, and supporting sponsors. Finally, thank you to our keynote sponsor, UFG Insurance. Here's a quick message from UFG as we get ready to introduce our first conference keynote.
I'm Allison Castor from UFG Insurance, a proud sponsor of this year's event. Like many great companies, UFG was born from one person's idea. That idea was to form a stock insurance company in Iowa back in 1946. 75 years later, we're a successful, publicly traded, and locally headquartered company, proud to call Iowa our home. At this year's Iowa Ideas event, we at UFG hope you find inspiration in the stories you hear and feel empowered to let your own ideas come to life.
Thank you, Allison. One of the exciting pieces to the 2022 conference is the addition of the Arts and Culture track. Recognizing the impact that arts and cultures has on Iowa and the quality of life within Iowa is something that we're proud to bring to Iowa Ideas. The response has been incredible. Introducing our keynote today is our longtime arts and culture reporter, as well as our track lead, reporter Diana Nollen.
Good morning. Thank you, Zach. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. It is my extreme pleasure to introduce Dr. Simon Estes. He is an Iowa treasure. He is someone who has been on my radar at least since my college days a million years ago. And it has been my pleasure to hear him speak and sing and to interview him over the years. It's always just so thrilling to hear his story. I can think of no one who has shaped the future of Iowa and Iowans in the musical arts than Dr. Simon Estes, who has broken so many barriers. And whenever I speak to young artists of color, they all know his name, even if they haven't met him. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Estes.
Good morning, Diana. Happy to see you again. And I'm honored to be on your program this morning. I'm sure most of you know I was born in Centerville, Iowa, way back in 1938. And so if you're quick with your math, you know what my age is. In about 5 months, I will reach 85. And God has really blessed me because I never had an idea, excuse me, that I would have traveled around the world, which I had done. And it's all because God gave me a talent to sing opera. And a man came to the University of Iowa in 1961 who discovered me and told me I had a voice to sing opera, and that man's name was Charles Kellis. I was a student at the University of Iowa, and I wanted to sing in the university chorus. And I remember I went to the choral director and said, "May I sing in the choir?" And he said, "Well, no," he said, "your voice isn't good enough." And there was a choir of maybe 100 voices. And he was the head of the voice department. And I said, "Well, could I take voice lessons with you?" He said, no, you have no talent. I wouldn't waste my time with you. He said, "However, there's a young teacher coming here this fall." That was in 1961. He said, "Maybe he will take you." And that was that man, Charles Kellis. Centerville, as I'm sure you know, was a coal mining town years ago. We had 3 working and producing coal mines when I was young. And my father worked in the coal mine. And we were very, very poor, economically speaking. My family, my father worked very, very hard. He was a great father and I had a great mother. And I was born in a little house that was 27 feet by 25 feet. And we lived in that little house with no electricity, no running water, no indoor facility. Everything was outdoors, so to speak. But we were really rich in love for God, in the church, in the Bible, and education. And I feel very blessed that I had a great Christian mother and a great Christian father who brought my 3 older sisters and me up in the church, in the Bible, and the importance of education. My father couldn't read or write because his father was a slave. My grandfather was a slave, sold for $500. And my father knew the value of education. He was in the First World War. He was in the Army. But he always said to me, "Son, you must get an education." And it's so important in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, it tells us to get knowledge. And knowledge, of course, is education, and that's by going to school. And I think we need 3 forms of nourishment as human beings. And one of the forms is nutrition, being able to eat food, help our bodies to develop. And the second one, of course, is getting information and nutrition for our minds by going to school. And in that I'm a Christian, I get my spiritual nourishment by reading my Bible and going to church. And that was a foundation in my family, as I mentioned earlier. But I graduated out of high school in Centerville, Iowa in 1956. And in 1957, I transferred to the University of Iowa. And that's where I met Charles Kellis. And since then, I've been really, really, really blessed. My mother also taught me humility. So even though I've sung for kings and queens and many prominent people around the world, I've always tried my very best to remain humble. And so let Diana say something now or ask some questions.
Excellent. So what gave you the courage to open the artistic doors that had been all but closed to operatic artists of color?
Well, when I was still at the University of Iowa, Mr. Kellis recommended that I go to Julliard School of Music in New York City, and he arranged an audition for me. And I flew out to New York and I auditioned, and after I finished singing, I can still remember they told me, they said, just wait outside the door, they said, Simon, and I did. And they called me back in and they said, well, I was very naive, needless to say, having come from Centerville. I didn't know the magnitude of Julliard School of Music. And so when they called me back in, they said, well, we'd like to give you a scholarship to go to Julliard. And I said, oh, thank you. Kind of like that. And they looked at each other like, this guy should be jumping up and down. But I didn't realize how important Julliard was, I think. And then they said, we will get you a Rockefeller grant from the Rockefeller family. And I always tell people, I thought, I wonder if that's a family dealing in rocks, but that was the Rockefeller family. So I went to Julliard from 1963 to 1965. And in 1965, I started my opera career in West Berlin at the Deutsche Oper, meaning the German Opera House. And since then, I sung in 84, 85 different opera houses all around the world, 115 different orchestras. I've sung 104 roles in operas in German, Italian, French, Spanish, Russian, all of these languages. And I would never have known any of that, and that God had given me a talent for all of those areas that I mentioned, because I didn't ever have any foreign languages, of course, in Centerville, Iowa. And it was difficult because of my skin color. And so I started my career in West Berlin. And then after a certain number of years, I was finally accepted here in the United States to sing in our opera houses.
You have performed all over the world, and you could live anywhere in the world. When did you return to Iowa as your home base, and what brought you back here?
I would say it probably started about 10 years ago when I came back to actually start living in Iowa. I was a professor at Boston University, and I've helped children all around the world. And I've had foundations, and my wife said to me, because at that time I was a professor at Boston University, Iowa State University, and also Wartburg College in Waverly. And I was still raising money to help save children's lives in Africa. I got involved with the United Nations Foundation. My wife said, Simon, I think you need to slow down, and why don't you go back to Iowa and help children in Iowa? And so being an obedient husband, I listened to my wife, and that's when we officially moved back, because I lived in Switzerland and Europe for most of my life and my career.
So what does an Iowa-based education afford to our young people? I know in the arts, so often, and in other realms, they consider Iowa to be a flyover state. And anybody who sat in my shoes knows that we are in a very vibrant arts culture here in Iowa. And what does Iowa afford to our young artists, our young people in general, and families?
I think Iowa offers a great education facilities. I think we have very fine schools and universities and colleges here. And also, I think we have a wonderful standard of living in Iowa. It's not, the wealthiest state in the United States, but nonetheless, we have a wonderful foundation, I think, in the family. As I said earlier, in education. I think it's a very healthy environment to bring children up. I didn't bring my children up, but I had 3 daughters, and 2 were born in Switzerland, 1 in the United States, but they've been to Iowa and they've seen the little house in which I was born in. And I think Iowa offers a community feeling, because we're small enough in terms of population. I think we have just a little over 3 million people in Iowa. People are very, very friendly. And I noticed that when I lived in the East. I lived in New York City for many, many years also. I always noticed the difference between young people in terms of their characters and their personality versus those in certain other parts of the United States. But Iowa is a very, very healthy state, and I'm happy to be from Iowa.
Excellent. Well, Cedar Rapids Opera, Orchestra Iowa, and other arts presenters in this region are all stepping up their game to feature programming and include artists of color. They've done this for years, but they're really, like I said, stepping up their game with this. All of the young performers of color with whom I've spoken in the past few years know who you are. How satisfying or humbling is that for you?
It's extremely humbling, and I feel deeply honored because I never dreamed when I was a young boy growing up in Centerville that I would get farther east, perhaps, than Chicago, Illinois. But I've sung in Japan and China and all over Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, South America. And it's all because of a talent of singing that God gave me. And it's been a great education to have traveled all around the world. I've been humbled by having sung for people and met people like Nelson Mandela. I'm not Catholic, but I sung for 2 popes at the Vatican. I've sung for the Billy Graham Crusade many years ago at Madison Square Garden. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who just recently died. I've sung for the Nobel Prize Committee. I've sold for 23 presidents of 23 different countries. I've sung for 6 presidents of the United States. And all of that was because God gave me a talent to sing.
I know your father
and
didn't
I didn't realize that he was giving me. No, go ahead. What?
I was going to say, I know your father didn't live long enough to see your great successes, but I believe your mother did. How did she feel about seeing her son just, finally, when you were embraced beyond Europe and you could come back to America and build a career here because enough barriers you had broken the barriers? How did she ever share with you how she felt about all of this?
Well, she obviously very, very proud. My father passed away in 1961. It's a long story, but it's because of racial discrimination that he died prematurely. But my mother, she got to hear me sing even at the Metropolitan Opera and at the White House way back in 1966. I won the bronze medal in the Tchaikovsky competition in Moscow, Russia. And President Johnson invited me to come sing at the White House. And he also invited my parents, but my father, of course, wasn't. My mother came. But when I first wanted to go into opera, my mother was a little, to even go to Julliard, she was a little skeptical because after my father passed away in 61, I was still working at Collins Radio. And I was supporting my mother and my brother. And I had a wonderful position. I was an expediter. That was my title. And so I had an opportunity to go to New York and audition in Julliard. And my mother said, son, we were called colored back in those days. She said, there's no colored person that has a position that you have attained at Collins Radio. I think you just ought to stay there, son, and keep working your way up the ladder, maybe become one of the higher positions. And I said, well, Mother, this is a great opportunity to go to New York. And so she said, well, okay, then, son, you have my blessings. And of course, when I was in the University of Iowa, I started out in pre-med. I wanted to be a doctor. And then I was interested in theology and social psychology, behavioral sciences. And my mother always said, why don't you just sing in churches? And I ended up becoming a singing doctor. But once I won the Tchaikovsky competition and President Johnson invited my mother to the White House, she was very, very happy that I did that. And she was very, very, very proud. And it enabled me, of course, to help lots of children all around the world because of being involved with the United Nations Foundation. I started the Simon Estes International Foundation for Children in Switzerland years ago, and I've helped save hundreds of children's lives, especially in Africa, who were dying of malaria. And my mother got to know about that also. So she was very, very proud and very, very supporting. And my mother had an incredible voice. Had she not been born in 1910 and having been born colored, as we were called in those days, she would have been singing at the Metropolitan Opera, because knowing what I know now about opera, she had the most phenomenal voice. And opera singers, God has given us very special vocal folds, or vocal cords, as we call them, because when we sing, we never use microphones. For example, the Metropolitan Opera here in the United States, which is our most important opera house and famous one, has over 4,000 seats. And then there's an orchestra in the orchestra pit, and our voices have to be able to project and fill up a big opera house without the use of microphones. And obviously, I didn't know anything about opera until Mr. Kellis introduced me to opera. But I'm just very happy that my mother got to actually hear me sing in a Metropolitan Opera House before she passed on. And she was very, very, very proud. And she taught me to always help other people. So I've helped, as I said, many children all around the world. I have several foundations, scholarships at different universities and colleges. I've lectured at Harvard University, Duke University, conservatories in San Francisco, Russia, France, Spain, Germany, all over. And I didn't know something else that God gave me. He gave me a talent for languages. And I literally have recorded and have sung in all of those languages that I mentioned earlier. And I realized later on that God gave me a talent for memorization and to sing and languages. And so I always give all of the praise and glory to God because he really did bless me. And I believe we're put on this earth to serve the Lord and to serve one another. And music, of course, as we know, I think it was Shakespeare that might have said, music is the international language of the world. And it certainly is. It helps bring people together. And classical music and opera music are certainly different from different other types of music. I'm not saying that we're any better, but all those great composers from the 16th century up to the 21st century composed works of music that will be performed forever, like composers like Mozart and Brahms and Beethoven, Tchaikovsky and Schubert, French composers. It's just a wonderful profession to have been in opera, and it's enabled me to sing in all the major opera houses, as I said earlier, in the world, and especially throughout the United States.
I know the path has not been easy. And the first time you shared with me some of your family history, it still boggles my mind to know that your grandfather was a slave, because I tend to think of slavery as having happened so very long ago, not just 3 or 4 generations ago. And I also remember that your mother gave you advice if you faced discrimination or if people made an unkind remark your way. And can you share with us that advice your mother gave you?
Yes, my grandfather was, right. My grandfather on my father's side was a slave, sold for $500. I have documentation about that, and I have pictures of him and my grandmother. But my mother said when I was a little child, and when I was growing up, because we in Centerville, and I don't think Centerville was any different than other little towns, we were called colored, as I said earlier. We were not allowed to swim in a swimming pool with white people. And that's why back in those days, very few people of color could swim. But eventually they would let us swim on Saturdays from 9 o'clock until 11 o'clock. And then we had to get out of the pool, the swimming pool, and put more disinfectant into the swimming pool water. There are many restaurants we couldn't eat in Centerville, Iowa when I was growing up because of our skin color. No person in Centerville of color had a decent job. They were all menial jobs and jobs that were just very, very poorly paid. And yes, there was discrimination in Centerville, and I think there was discrimination, as I said earlier. I was born in 1938 all over Iowa in the United States. But my mother always believed in Christ, Jesus Christ philosophy, to love your enemies. And my mother taught my sisters, and my father did too, and me, never to hate white people, but to pray for them. And so whenever I was discriminated against, I would just have to pray. And they wouldn't let me sing in the opera houses here in the United States for many, many years. I remember in the early 70s, I'd already been singing in Europe from 1965 up until that time. And I called my mother. I was living in New York. I called her in tears and said, Mother, I've sung in Vienna and Rome and London and Zurich and all the European opera houses, but they still won't let me sing in a lot of the opera houses in my own country. And my mother said, well, now, son, you get down on your knees and you pray. And that is something she taught me when I was very young. I'm just going to give you an example. Say if I would have come home and I told my mother that a white boy hit me or called me the N-word, my mother would have said to me, son, you get down on your knees and you pray for that boy. And she's told us never to hate white people, but just to pray for them and to be strong and never give up. And many times since I have lived about 85 years, I think I'm really grateful that I was born the color I was born and brought up in a poor economical family, but we were really strong in education, the importance of education, Christian and brotherly love, and to work hard and to be honest and always tell the truth. My mother was very strong about following all of the 10 commandments in the Bible. And so the way I have always coped with racial discrimination was to never give up. I remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was singing in Canada. And I remember I was getting dressed in my tails to go out and perform. And Walter Cronkite came on the TV and said, Martin Luther King has been assassinated. And I remember my heart just sank. I heard him speak at Cole College, actually, when I was still a student at the University of Iowa. I heard Martin Luther King speak. And I had to go ahead and sing the concert, but I told the people I'd have to change my repertoire because I couldn't sing any happy songs. I mention this because after the concert, they had a reception for me and they said, why don't you move to Canada? They said, we won't treat you people the way they treat them in the United States. And I said, no. I said, I would rather stay in the United States and keep working for equality and justice and hope that my country someday will treat all people, because in God's eyes, we're all human beings. There's only one race, it's the human race. And so I never became bitter, but I must admit there were times that I was sad. I just used those times to help me have a stronger character, I hope.
That's all very beautiful and inspirational for those of us who can't imagine what it's been like to walk in your shoes. Have you been able to get the roles you wanted, or has race ever played into that? Has the color of your skin kept you from any roles that you wanted, or is it more of a what we used to call, when I was in college, colorblind casting, where if you're right for the role, you get the role?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, maybe I didn't mention this, I have sung 104 different operas, and I've sung 17 title roles in opera. In other words, the name of the opera, I sang that character. In the beginning, it was difficult, and some people wouldn't hire me because of my skin color. But in terms of any role that I was denied, and I think that again was a blessing, I was not denied. So I say I've sung 104 different roles, different characters, like King Philip and Don Carlo, the title role of the Flying Dutchman. I've just sung all of this repertoire, and it was difficult. They made me up when I first sang in Berlin in 1965. But they made me up as white as snow. I would never forget that. I was looking in the mirror and I thought, boy, if my mother could see me now. But they still went ahead and engaged me. And in Europe, they judged one more on the character of and the talent of their voice and on their skin color, because we had makeup that can make somebody look like E.T., as we all know. So it didn't really stop me from getting the repertoire that I wanted to sing. I got it more in Europe than I did in the United States. I'm sorry to say I never became bitter, and I would never give up my citizenship. But it was very difficult in the United States, and especially for men of color.
So what was that first role in Berlin?
It was Ramphis, who was a high priest in the opera. And it's a long story, but I wouldn't have time to tell you about. But when I first auditioned for the Opera House, they immediately heard me sing. They asked me would I come and sing in Aida. It was April 19th, 1965, when I made my debut as Ramphis in the opera Aida.
Oh, that's beautiful. We have a couple of questions from our viewers this morning. One is remarking on your calmness, your presence, your never-ending smile. And I know you've talked a bit about where that strength come from, but this person also would like to know what advice you have for others overcoming challenges and barriers, whether it be racial or whatever kind of barriers, physical, that they might encounter.
I think, first of all, we have to realize that, and I come back again, there's only one race, the human race. I wouldn't have time to explain why we are all different, but I think God made us different colors, people having different shapes of eyes to test the character of us as human beings. Can we love someone if they look different from the way we look? But I always tell people and young kids and students of color, you just have to stay strong. And in that I'm a Christian, I believe we should follow the example of Jesus. And he told us to love our enemies and to turn the other cheek. That doesn't mean that we accept discrimination and injustice, but that we have to be strong. And my mother and father taught my sisters and me never to give up. We are human beings. Yes, as I said, we can be sad, we can cry, but we have to never become bitter, because if you become bitter, it's not good for your health and it doesn't help solve the problem. I long for the day, but I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, that we would have complete justice and equality in the United States. But we have to keep going on and struggling and never give up, never become bitter, pray, read the Bible, and listen to what God tells us in the Bible. Follow Jesus's example.
Thank you. Another viewer would like to know, would like you to talk a little bit more about the work of your foundations and how you keep tabs on what they're doing. I know you have foundations in Africa. You have a school there, don't you?
Yes, I founded the Simon Estes Music High School back in 1994. I got involved in malaria. I sang in the grand finale concerts when they had the World Cup soccer, as they call it, in Johannesburg in 1910. And before I went out to sing, the moderator mentioned that every 30 seconds a child was dying from malaria, and all they needed was a $5 net under which had been treated to sleep under. And 1 million children, now this was 2010, 9 million little Black children, 5 years of age and under, they were dying of a mosquito bite and had no, because of malaria. And all they needed is a $5 net, as I say, to sleep under. And I think God called me to that cause. So I came back to the United States. I flew out to the United Nations Foundation in 2013 to double check all of these statistics, found out they were true. So I came to Iowa and I did a number of concerts to raise money to help save children's lives in Africa. I raised $532,000. This has never been talked about much in the press, to buy the nets, and I gave every penny to the United Nations Foundation to help save these children's lives. And because of what I did, I had 52 choirs sing with me a Christmas concert in 2013 at the Hilton Coliseum in Iowa State. And that, along with having sung in 50 counties in Iowa and give money to the foundation, we helped some other people donate money when they found out what I had done. It helped reach a goal of about $1 million. And so I helped save over 100,000 children's lives in Africa. And of course, I have scholarship funds here in Iowa. My wife and I have given hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships to high school graduating seniors here in Iowa. I don't talk about it a lot because my mother in the Bible said, don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing when you do something for somebody. Just be grateful that you can do it. But I have had foundations in Europe where I've helped save hundreds of children's lives in Africa and throughout Europe, and just going to keep on working. I'm still a professor at Iowa State and DMAC, and I'm going to continue to help young students. And my wife and I are very grateful that we have the Simon Estes Foundation here in Iowa, and we help children in education with scholarships.
Now, I've had the pleasure of hearing you in your Roots and Wings tour, and I know that was halted by the pandemic, but the proceeds from that tour also were channeled toward your philanthropic works, right?
Yes, we've given, yes, I gave 50% of my fee into the Simon Estes Foundation, and we've given hundreds of scholarships to students here in Iowa, and they can go to whatever college or university and they can study whatever they want to study. I have a scholarship fund at DMAC College and a scholarship fund at Iowa State University, and in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I found it 40 years ago. I found the Simon Estes Educational Foundation in Tulsa, and I've helped them raise over $3 million, and we've given over 425 scholarships to underprivileged children who are living in the Tulsa area, because that was an area which they had a horrible racial problem many years ago. And we've given students scholarships, I think over 425 scholarships. They've gone to Harvard and Duke University and Yale on down or on up. And we've given those scholarships also.
Excellent. Now, is it 13 honorary doctoral degrees that you received?
Yes, I received 13 honorary doctors. The 13th one was from Julliard School of Music in May. They gave me my 13th. And also I'm in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. in the new African American Culture section. I'm in that. And next week, I'm going to be inducted in the first Opera Hall of Fame, which I think you heard about it, right?
Yes, I did, but let's tell our viewers about that.
Well, 10 people are being inducted. There's never been an Opera Hall of Fame, and I feel humbled and honored that I'm among those 10. And that'll be taking place on the 21st of October, which will be a week from tomorrow in New York City.
And I know our very own Daniel Kleinknecht, who is the founder and artistic director and conductor for Cedar Rapids Opera, told me that he will be in the audience. What has it meant to you over the years to work with our homegrown efforts to further the arts, especially the operatic arts?
Well, I was very grateful that Michael Eagle asked me about Porgy and Bess to celebrate their 50th anniversary. And I talked with him 2 years ago, and I said, I think you should do it. And we discussed it. And as you probably heard about, in July, we had 7 performances. 1 performance had to be canceled because of COVID. But I think it was a wonderful thing to do. And I told him I think he should do George Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, because that's the greatest American opera ever written by Gershwin. And the whole cast, I must tell you this, all the choir, they were of color. And all those operas I've sung all around the world, I never sang in an opera where everybody was of color, including the choir, except when we did it at the Metropolitan Opera way back in, I think it's 1983 or 85. The Met had never done Porgy and Bess, and they did Porgy and Bess, and I did Porgy there. But I was very proud that celebrating the anniversary, because I'd never sung with the Des Moines Metro Opera. And I was very happy to participate in that. And that was my farewell, because I decided I was going to retire from opera. I still might do concerts and recitals, but that was my last performance. And it's anyhow, that's that.
I remember sharing with you that how wonderful it was for my mother, who had wanted to be an opera singer, but the opportunities weren't there for her. And but I took her to Independence, Iowa on the hottest 4th of July ever. And we got to hear you. And I know you remember that concert because it was so hot.
Oh, it was roasting. I will never forget that. It was outdoors in the football field, and it must have been 95 or more degrees.
Yes, it was just amazing. Now, Zach, you've joined us again. So what do you have to say to us?
Yes, well, I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Estes. Your message is truly powerful, and thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for joining us at Iowa Ideas. I hate to be the one to kind of call the conversation to an end, but truly your work is inspirational. The calm and just the power that you operate. So thank you for taking the time with us this morning.